Hello and welcome to this Cropster origin tutorial. In this video we're going to discuss batch separation. We use batch separation in circumstances where you receive an amount of coffee, usually in cherry, and want to separate it by quality before you process it. There are 4 different options for how to set your settings. Go to Origin Settings in the top right corner and click on Processing. Under Coffee Separation, you'll see the 4 options. By default, no separation is selected. That means if you receive a load of cherry, you're going to keep it all together and process it as one. But if you do choose to separate it, you have 3 options. You can either separate it by weight. This implies that you will have multiple parts that each get weighed before you start drying the coffee. Or if you choose to just take a sample of that coffee and use that sample to estimate the weights of those separate parts, you can use the separation by percent option. Or if your suppliers, the individual farmers, are bringing to you coffee that has already been separated by quality, you can choose the separation by supplier option. For each of these options, you have to choose the name of the parts, and this is also controlled by the quality format. So you can name your parts based on cherry ripeness, whether they're export or local grade, primary or secondary, superior or inferior, or you can choose to use a letter, A or B, or a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Let's choose cherry ripeness. And we'll start with separation by weight. We should define some default parts. At least 2 parts are useful. So here we'll say we're going to have a ripe and then filter out the unripe cherries when we process this. We can also set a default process. Maybe I'm going to process all of my ripe cherries as a washed and all of my unripe as a natural. Also, we can set defaults for project and pile. So the pile option means that we might not care about the weight of this coffee after it is finished processing, so we'll select that for our unripe cherry. And we'll also assign these to the gold and bronze projects that we've created. I'll save those settings. And now, if I go into my batches and create a new batch, I'll add a few suppliers. And give them a certain amount of cherry they delivered. And say that we delivered that in January. Now you'll notice that those defaults that we created underneath Origin Settings are already applied here. The only thing we need to do is say how much weight went into each of the parts. So we've got a total of 66,300 kg. Maybe half of that is our top quality, and the other half is our unripe. If we create that batch, you'll notice that 2 parts have been created. One of them is processed as a natural, or unripe. The other is processed as a washed, and they're roughly split in half. If we select separation by percent, you'll notice that a percent column shows up in our default parts section. So if we expect that we might get maybe 60% ripe and 40% unripe based on our experience, we can put those in. Similarly, if we add a new batch, click on our next, we now see that those percentages, those default percentages, are populated on the parts. We can of course change the percentages if we've taken a sample and have a better estimate. You'll notice that the received weight will have automatically updated itself based on those percentages. Lastly, let's look at the separation by supplier option. If we choose separation by supplier, there's two interesting effects. One is that we're going to be able to actually define the parts, the weight that we get for each individual supplier, and then they will be aggregated together. We can also choose to give each part a different price so that we pay our suppliers based on the weight. So maybe I pay 1.5 USD for the ripe cherry, but only 75 cents for the unripe. If I create a batch, and add a supplier, you'll notice that there are two parts, ripe and unripe. Whereas before, this only appeared on the processing step. You'll also notice if I reveal the price per unit column, those prices, those default prices, are already populated. So now all I need to do is say how much ripe cherry I got from Knickerbocker. If I have another supplier also delivering cherry, I simply add the supplier, and another two rows get created, which each correspond to the different parts. Now we've got a total amount of 69,602 kg and a total price calculated over here. If I go to the next section, those weights have already been aggregated according to the part. So this received weight is Nick's contribution plus Catherine's for each part. And go ahead and create the batch. And those weights will show up over here. In each of the various different batch separation methods, you can of course go and see the details by clicking on the individual batches and then scrolling down.